The Merchant Sales Podcast is brought to you by Valor Paytech, the payment technology company that is revolutionizing cash discounting. Valor Paytech is a processor-agnostic solution with all of the omni-channel features you're looking for: standalone terminals, mobile devices, desktop, gateway, e-invoices, all with cash discounting and surcharging in mind. I would encourage you to take a moment to get a free demo of Valor Paytech. Head over to ccsalespro.com/Valor, V-A-L-O-R, ccsalespro.com/Valor, V-A-L-O-R, to get your free demo today and to watch videos and read information about this amazing new processor-agnostic omni-channel technology solution. Boy, Patty, what an exciting episode that we had have for them today with Roger McNamara and everything. I think it's really cool.
I think it's really cool. When I first spoke to Roger a couple weeks ago, I just came away and went, wow, I just learned something. Whenever you can learn something from somebody, he has so much really cool information. This B2B opportunity is humongous. Yep. And I think Roger puts a really good face on it.
Yeah, imagine if you could go back in time to when only 8% of transactions in retail and restaurant locations were being used with a card. Knowing what you know now, right? That's where we're at with B2B. Like, there's that big of an opportunity. So we're really excited about that. In questions from the field, I talk about the 3 strategies I would choose from if I was starting an ISO, based on if I had green agents or experienced or payment professionals. And then Patty, tell us about the Insiders Report today.
Talking about what merchants are, what kind of transactions they're seeing and what they anticipate. And, not surprisingly, there's a lot of emphasis on contactless. Yep. But there's also a lot of optimism out there among merchants, which I think is really good.
Yep. Love it. So with that being said, here we go. Let's dive into our interview with Roger McNamara.
Let's dive into it.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
All right, everybody, I'm here today with Roger McNamara. Roger is the president at Guide to Interchange. How you doing today, Roger?
Hey, good morning. How you doing, James? Nice to see you again.
Yes, sir. Doing fantastic. And so I'm really excited about this conversation today. So we haven't really discussed this in detail. Patty and I are going to talk to Roger about the needs and kind of the value proposition for selling B2B merchant accounts. So these merchants that are selling, business to business transactions. And so before we dive into all the details and all the minutia, though, Roger, we'd love to get your backstory. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this industry. I know you have an interesting story. And then how did you end up focusing on training ISOs to sell B2B merchants?
Sure. Well, thanks, James. Again, good morning to you and Patty, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about B2B and sales training. My backstory, I've been in the payment space for about 28 years. I started my career in South Florida as a local rep for American Express, back selling door-to-door merchants in the business-to-consumer space back then. I started back when there were knuckle busters in paper and before the electronic age, and went through that revolution. In 1997, I graduated up into kind of national sales, worked through that for about 17 years, signing pretty much most of the household names you can think of across the U.S. today, places like JetBlue and SeaWorld and Geico Insurance and State Farm and a bunch of places like that. And then got into a leadership role, first at the local level with American Express, managing local sales reps in the sales process, and then at the national level, managing national managers of business development in the B2B space. Round about 2012, we figured out the B2C world was ending for us because, unlike the bank card world at Amex, when you sign an account, it really goes off our slate. So the next evolution was full bore into B2B, and round about that time we started to really take this seriously and dive deep into the B2B space. Earlier this year, I left Amex and I thought about lots of second careers, and I chose this one as a sales trainer, and it's working out pretty good now, training in the B2B space.
That's really cool, Raj. If you wouldn't mind setting it up for our audience, if you could talk to us a little bit about B2B payments and what's the opportunity here for ISOs and agents.
Yeah, so the opportunity is a huge one. You know, the B2B payment space is about, depending on who you talk to, it's somewhere between 10 and $20 trillion of opportunity. But here's some key stats that are really relevant for the ISO community. Only 8% of transactions today in the B2B space go on plastic, meaning 92% go somewhere else. So they're going to check, wire, and ACH. And there's a reason for that, Patty. There's a reason because the merchant base, known as the suppliers in this space, perceive credit and credit cards and plastic in general to be the most expensive alternative.
Right.
So it's not surprising that the share is where it is. It hasn't been rising much. We've seen a check decrease a little bit at the expense of ACH as ACH has gotten more efficient. But wire and ACH are real formidable competitors to the plastic space today. So that kind of frames up the industry. It's a huge opportunity out there. And really, Patty, if you can think about it, you know, a B2B transaction, unlike a business to consumer transaction, can be monetized 3 times during the life cycle before the actual product gets to a consumer level. So you've got a manufacturer, you've got a distributor, and you've got a wholesaler. In that breadth, you can capture that transaction up to 3 times in the process. And so it can be a huge opportunity. So everything invoiceable, it can be converted to plastic.
It's so interesting you say this. I mean, the percentage you just said is crazy, 8%. So 92% of all B2B transactions right now are not running over on plastic. Which is insane.
That's amazing.
Like that's a huge opportunity. Now this next question I have for you is interesting, and it really sets up for me because you know, the whole idea of this conversation is that there's this value proposition around selling B2B merchants, right? And to illustrate how our industry thinks about this, I will be transparent with our audience. I initially sent a list of questions to Roger when he said, hey, we talk about B2B sales. Oh, okay. All my questions were about interchange optimization, right? Which is, you know, definitely we'll talk about as an interesting part of the equation. But then I ended up having to redo all my questions for Roger because I realized, no, that's not what he does. He's actually creating this whole concept of value. So talk to us about the pain points. Like for B2B merchants, what are their kind of main pain points that you're going after when you're building the sales approach?
Yeah, James, that's a fantastic question. So the number one pain point in the supplier base is cost. So they have this perception that plastic is the most expensive payment method they can offer a buyer. And to some extent, they're correct, but they're a little misinformed. And unfortunately, they've been led down the path through years of erroneous acceptance to this place. And what do I mean by that? So if you look at a B2B merchant today, their perception is that there's a 2 to 3% cost. And there's this thing thrown in there that really changes the dynamic of the transaction. So let's just think about a business to consumer transaction for a second. Right now, if I want to go in and buy something in a store, I walk in, I buy it, I go to the counter and I pay, and the transaction is over. That's a typical B2C transaction. However, in the B2B world, that's not how it happens. Typically, you buy something, but you don't pay for it. You get term. And that term is what causes the plastic transaction to become increasingly expensive. Because if I give that buyer term, and at the end of that term, that buyer shows up to pay and wants to settle with a card, that supplier effectively has financed that transaction twice. They financed the receivable for that period of time, and they financed the cost of the transaction. So now you start to see why the supplier base looks at plastic and says, this is a very costly proposition to me. What we've done is we've kind of flipped that. So we look at that transaction, and in our process, we teach how to unpack it, how to take it out of the term process and create and quantify the value that you deliver with the plastic that you are going to give that supplier. And it's very effective in the way we're able to show the ISO seller today the cost of accelerating cash, the cost of efficiencies in the transaction, and some other benefits as well.
So let me see if I can unpack this for our audience a little bit and tell me if I'm saying this correctly. I think I'm understanding it now, which is, you know, I'm a supplier. And so let's say I'm selling something to a business, you know, $10,000. Maybe I'm a food supplier and I sell a restaurant $10,000 worth of, you know, ingredients, right? So what you're saying is, the normal way this works is, as a supplier, I'm going to go ahead and provide those ingredients to the restaurant and say, you have 30 or 60 days or whatever it is to pay me, right? Now, the problem, of course, is I still have to come up with that $10,000. So either I'm using my own cash, which is unlikely, or I'm financing. So I'm borrowing I'm the supplier. I'm borrowing 10 grand from my bank or from a short-term finance, whatever, right? That's going to finance the paper. And so I'm paying interest on the 10,000 short-term interest, which is generally very high. Then at the end of the 30, 60 days, the restaurant reaches out and says, okay, we're ready to settle. We're going to use our Visa Platinum Business Rewards card. And I go, I just paid all the interest on the 10 grand. Now I have to pay another 3%. So is that an accurate description of what you're talking about here?
Absolutely. Now you're starting to see why only 8% of transactions come on plastic.
Exactly.
And it's not because there isn't demand.
Right.
That person using that super duper platinum card wants to use it at that merchant.
Right.
And that supplier would love to get that payment, but not under the circumstances that he's taking today. Now, so you can imagine this: when an ISO walks in today, asks for a statement, and says he can save that supplier a penny or two, he's really only adding salt to the wound, because he still doesn't want that cost. He's still not addressing what the core issue is. And that's the fundamental issue in this space that we've addressed.
Right. And so it sounds like what you're saying is, in our industry, we look at something called like the effective rate, right? So we would look at it and say total fees divided by total volume is, let's say 2.5%, 3% or whatever it is for that merchant. And we're saying, hey, we can take you from 3% to 2.5% with optimization or whatever. What you're saying is that's not enough. If we want to sell B2B merchants, we have to kind of change the game and change the rationale and the whole value proposition, right?
Yeah, and here's another reason why you have to do it. There's increasing competition from the fintech sector that's coming into this space, which is participating in the digital revolution. So we've all heard about this buzzword, digital revolution. Businesses are getting away from paper and invoices, and they're going electronic. And in order to do that, they're bringing in these fintech companies who are digitizing not only that process of the invoice, but all of the payment process. So they're digitizing the ACH, the check, the wire. And here's the thing: they're not really in tune with the value of credit, because they're taking a piece of the action from all of the transactions. So the ISO is kind of getting isolated here because he's not playing in the same field. And we bring him back into that game by teaching him this method to make him ultra competitive with not only the fintechs, but also when he's in front of the supplier to talk their language.
Right. So I mean, cash flow, the impact of speed of payment. I mean, obviously there's an implication there, right? Can you kind of speak to that in terms of the speed of payment and how it affects their bottom line?
Absolutely. So cash flow is very important in the B2B space. So there's a rough rule of thumb that for every day you wait for payment, it costs you about 2 basis points.
Wow.
So so you can imagine, if you're waiting 60 days for your money on average, that's about 120 basis points that it's costing you. In addition, as James pointed out, to what it's costing you on the financing side of it as well. So, it's a double whack, and then you're paying on top of that. So we teach a method that allows you to help that business to accelerate that payment and then take value for it. So there is a lot of things that go on in a B2B space that do not happen in the business consumer space. The transactions can be very fluid. The card members, the people who want to use at these suppliers, are willing to exchange term for use of card in some cases, and that can be negotiated. Or the merchant can position credit as an alternative to term, take value for the actual acceleration that they get, and then be able to take that card member's transaction without any resistance. So there's a lot of options here that we teach, but today there is no option being presented to these suppliers. It's just hammering on top of them more of a bad practice that they've been currently conducting. And that's why, again, we're seeing the resistance in this space.
So it sounds like what you're saying is, in the example I used a little bit ago, let's go back to the supplier with the $10,000 ingredient order from the restaurant. You're saying that supplier could maybe go to that restaurant. You would teach these business to business suppliers to say, if you want to use your card, you can use your card for term, or you can wait 30 to 60 days and pay us a check. right?
Absolutely.
Is that kind of okay?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, there are some gateways out there that have some features built into them that allow for this. So,
Sure.
just because you have a gateway and maybe you're not utilizing it to the fullest extent because you don't realize this, but there could be a payment date set in the gateway that allows for payment with card up to this term, 10 days. After that, it goes to ACH or check, thereby giving the supplier the best of both worlds.
I love that.
So, and I talk a little bit about this in other ways on my blog, et cetera, where I talk about, our kind of community has put the cart before the horse. So we've got these tools out there like gateways, but we don't really understand them enough to use them to create value for the sales proposition. And this is one of the ways that can be done. So again, there's some huge opportunity here. And again, the idea is to make the supplier comfortable. You don't want him to do the transaction. You want him to accept the transaction. And we kind of teach that method where it allows the ISO to go in, be very conversational about this, and understand it holistically, not just from a credit perspective, but against all the other payment methods that they're competing against for their space to increase their share. James, Patty, I often hear from ISOs, after they take the training, that they had a merchant who was doing $100,000 a month in B2B. And they always felt that merchant would do more. And then the volume increases to $1 million or $1.5 million because they've given that supplier a process that they now can work with that allows them to be cost effective, not like they were before.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. So when we're talking about this idea of the effective rate versus the effective cost, right? So the effective rate being total fees divided by total volume, it's very kind of isolated is the word you used. It's like, this is just payments. We want to move more to this idea of effective cost and saying, what is the effective cost of accepting these transactions? There's a lot of moving pieces, which I know we don't have nearly enough time to cover everything here, but let's touch on tax implications for a second. So when we're analyzing one of these transactions and the effective cost of accepting plastic, how does taxes, how does that figure into the equation?
Sure. So tax is really important. There are two other really key components too. I would tell you there's probably 5 things that are of major value to the supplier, but the first 2 are the accelerated value of the cash.
Right.
The second is the operational efficiencies that you deliver, and that's a whole section by itself, and they're quantifiable. And then the third is the tax element. So the cost of credit is a business expense and it's tax deductible, and we teach ISOs how to incorporate that into their net effective cost. It's a very, very effective tool. Most suppliers are kind of aware of it, but not aware of it, but not sure about it. And it's really clear what the benefit is here. And it's huge.
Yeah.
And again, it's going to become even more impactful if the corporate tax rate is increased, because the higher that corporate tax rate goes, the better the benefit it is to the business. So it's one of the key elements we show. We show ISOs how to quantify that. We show them the value of it. We show them how to present that to the actual supplier in a holistic format. And we give them all the backup documents. So if anybody should ever question them and say, hey, this is funny math. It's not actually, it's real. Here it is. This is the regulation.
So let's see, because I had a hard time. Sorry, Patty. I had a hard time with this one initially. So let me see if I can break down the way it finally made sense to me. Which was,
that's what I was going to do. Go ahead.
Okay. So the idea here is, let's say again, I'm the supplier. I have this $10,000 transaction, and let's say that the cost of accepting this piece of plastic is 2.5%. So that's $250. You're saying that $250 is, of course, tax deductible because it's an expense. So I'm not going to pay tax on that $250. Otherwise, I would have, right? So if my corporate tax rate, let's say, is 30%, just to use some rough numbers here, then, what is that, $75 or something like that, where 75 of that 250 is not actually an effective cost because I'm going to get a tax write-off and I'm going to be able to keep more of my money.
Absolutely. So, you're in a call and your supplier is telling you credit is too much. Now you have the ability to push back and say, no, my cost is not 2.5 to 3%. My cost is X, and it's substantially less. And I will tell you that in some cases, when we look at these things, it's 50, 60 basis points is the net effective cost after you take into account these things. Now, we haven't even touched on the value of customer service or level 2, level 3 data, because Unfortunately, our community leads with level 2 and level 3 data, and it's always not viable. It's always not there. Sometimes the merchants can't even gather that information up, and they're not accepting cards that qualify for it. So we give them all the tools to show them the 5 components of value, and then whichever they can apply to the situation they're in, they use and come up with a net effective cost. And it's very effective. I mean, I've presented this to thousands and thousands of merchants over my career, and merchants will turn around to you and they will say, I had no idea. No one's ever shown me this way. I've always looked at credit as being the most expensive piece of payment I use. And in a lot of cases, you're getting it competitive with the other forms of payment. And that's what you want to do, because you want to open up your opportunity for as much volume to come through. There's no point in doing all the work to get $100,000 worth of volume when you could be getting $1 million. Give yourself the best chance to get the best return from the account. And again, there are literally thousands of B2B merchants out there today that are accepting and not accepting. And there's an opportunity on both sides of the equation.
Well, and it sounds like there's an opportunity in the middle for those that are accepting, but not accepting as much as they could.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it would seem to me also, Roger, that, it actually makes credit all the more cheaper, because when you're borrowing or you're taking 60 days to collect, that cost is not a tax deduction.
Absolutely. Patty, here's the one thing that it does that most people don't realize. It shifts the risk responsibility.
Right.
So if I'm a supplier and I have multiple buyers, and I can shift that risk to someone else, not only am I saving with shifting the risk, but I'm saving the cost of actually risking them, which isn't cheap either. So there are all these downstream effects that we show the people who take our training, that they can go in and be intelligent about and talk to the suppliers about, that they have no idea, or they don't think this way. But those are huge things that you can shift in the balance, and they produce enormous savings in this space. It's funny. I was on a call a couple of years ago out in the Midwest somewhere, talked to a large trucking company that was doing, these numbers are staggering, $800 million in credit. And I said to the gentleman, I said, when was the last time you spoke to your Visa MasterCard provider? And he said, 8 years ago when we signed up.
Ooh.
So you start to see, and I have no idea what he was paying or what the opportunity was, but I'm sure there was for somebody. These are the types of accounts. Now, I'm not suggesting they're all $800 million accounts. There are accounts in all sectors of the business, but this is wide open territory for ISOs to jump into and to be effective in.
And it sounds like either we're going to get it or the fintechs are going to get it, right? So it's...
Well, yeah. And I can tell you this, the ISO community's knowledge of credit is so superior here that this as an add-on will be huge benefit to them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree. Sure. So I want to touch on one more real quick, which is interchange optimization. But I want to frame this a little bit because, for our audience to really understand where we're going, we're talking about taking this presentation from saying your 2.5–3% cost to accept plastic, and you're saying, well, wait, there's operational efficiency. So now we're down to maybe a 2% effective cost. And then, well, there's tax implications. Now we're down to 1.5. And then there's, that you're saving the cost of having to finance it. Now we're down to, so what's happening is we're chipping away to get down to that 50 basis point number in some cases. So talk about interchange optimization. I know it's only one kind of, cog in the wheel here, but talk about that a little bit. How does that impact the value, proposition?
It's huge. It's number 4 on the list of value pillars that we present to a merchant. It can be extremely beneficial, up to 0.5 basis point in value. But we got to be careful with it. We can't lead with it. It isn't something we always know. So we got to be smart about where it takes place. And what it is. On some cards, it's built in and it's very easy to identify. And some gateways have done some terrific work around interchange optimization. So you just need to be as knowledgeable as possible where it fits into the transaction, and then take value for it.
Yeah.
But I would caution, we've kind of got into a little bit of a comfort zone in the bank card world, where we look at certain things as being kind of easy buttons. Surcharging, easy button. Let me just, pass this off over here. cash discounting, easy button, level 3 data, easy button. There are things to understand about this to make it viable for your merchant and your supplier. So it's a huge opportunity out there. We teach it as well in our training and how to be effective with it and how to take credit for it, so to speak. It's funny, James, a few years ago, I was on a call where we were going through our process, and we discovered that for the merchant not to take plastic on the transaction, there was a negative effect to their business. And it was really interesting because there was some interchange optimization available.
Right.
And then when we added up all the components of the process, because they had a huge weighted cost of capital, in other words, their expense for financing the transaction, that it actually was a negative proposition. Now, that's sometimes a little hard to explain to somebody, but if you don't do this, you're losing money.
Right.
But suffice it to say, we're able to get these net effective costs in a very, very compatible range for everybody to digest.
Well, and what you're saying basically is for that merchant, you're saying it's actually costing you more to accept checks or ACH or wires or whatever you're doing than it would if you're accepting cards, once you take into account the risk, the optimization, the tax benefits, operational, all the stuff that we're talking about.
And it's totally counterintuitive, but when you have that confidence and that knowledge behind it, you can attack this with the CFO or any finance type within an organization. We give you that ability to be able to go into those situations and be very, very effective.
Sure. So, all right. So before we let you go, Roger, I don't want to let you off here before we really help our audience to understand exactly what you do. So, one really quick question right off the bat. I'm assuming that you work with ISOs. Do you have a program for like an individual, I'm a single agent and I want this, or does it go through the ISO exclusively?
Sure. So that's a great question too. So we've developed a 1-day training course for ISOs. It comprises of soup to nuts, 4 complete modules on B2B where we teach them everything they have to know in a 1-day training session. That's a one-on-one. We conduct a lot of them via Zoom today, but when they're local to me, I do them in person too. So we've done these with tons of ISOs across the country today, and we're continuing to do them. It's very effective, and it gives them not only a sense of everything we talked about, but it also gives them the ability to develop an acquisition strategy. I will tell you this, James and Patty, there are B2B leads that are literally being thrown in the garbage today by folks where we teach our trainees to go out and get them. I don't want to reveal too much because it would be giveaway on the training, but there's a huge opportunity out there that is so ridiculously simple that the ISOs that we've actually presented it to kind of were a little skeptical on day one and said, I don't know about this. And then on day 2 came back to us and said, I can't believe that this is actually true. So there's a ton of B2B opportunity out there, and it's for the taking, and it's closer than you think. So we offer that 1-day course. It's very effective. We kind of work it around the ISO schedule. We typically do a 2-hour session, take a break and do a 2-hour session with them. And then very uniquely, what we offer is a 1-hour follow-up with the ISO. So we don't give them training and then dump it and run. We give them an hour so that they can go out in the field, practice what they've been taught, and then come back to us, and they have like an hour of consulting where they can bounce their ideas up against us, or deal constructs or things they've seen, et cetera, or things maybe they need to brush up on. So we think that's very effective. So we've developed this 1-day course, and it's very comprehensive soup to nuts for the ISO community.
Awesome. And so just to clarify from earlier, you're saying that would be for an ISO, and then an individual agent could also do that if they wanted to make the investment. Is that what you're saying? Or is there a separate program for the individual?
No, we would offer it to the individual if they wanted to make the investment themselves, or if they worked for an ISO and they had multiple people, we have price points for multiple people attending the session. So we've got it across the board. And to be honest, if you're a proprietary sales force as well, and you've got 100, 200 reps out there, we have a package that suits those folks as well, and we've done those training sessions.
Sure. And so it sounds like what you're saying is, as far as the process of implementation here, it sounds like there's a 1-day training that's pretty intense and pretty robust. They go through that, and then day 2, they would be ready to start getting some leads and start trying to get some deals in the works. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And they have us as a resource to come back to and bounce their ideas against, which is, kind of unheard of in the training community. So, we're dedicated entirely to B2B training in the merchant services space. That's our forte. That's what we do. That's, everything that we've developed is geared towards that in a very simple, easy to understand method. And we give all the materials that are associated with this. Any backup, our calculator, everything that we use for the training is available to the recipient of the training as well.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. And, I obviously my audience knows I don't very often promote other trainers in the industry because, that's what I do. And there aren't very many actually. But, we have Mark Beauchamp on here, and I wanted to have you on here because I really do believe what you're presenting is very unique. It's definitely not something that I have any interest in creating. It's so interesting because you have this like vast experience in the B2B space. That was really never my specialty. When I was out selling, I did sell a lot of larger accounts, but they were generally multiple location or larger retail. And so the B2B thing has always been, and it's become so much more interesting to me over the last couple of years as we've developed our statement analysis tool and done the interchange optimization and worked with Paytrace. And, I've started to kind of get more into that world. And what I found, just like I found 10 years ago in the, B2C side of the industry, is no training. And there's just no, like, where do you find this information? And I definitely had this feeling like, wow, there's something missing. So then when I saw what you were doing, it's like, wow, that's awesome. So I definitely want to encourage all of our listeners, whether you're an individual agent and you want to try to get this with your ISO or whether you're an ISO exec, this is information that you need because you're going to find opportunities. One opportunity with one merchant doing $3 million a month in volume is going to pay for itself and then some. So, Roger, tell us a little bit more about where they should go. Where would you send them to either contact you or go to a website or whatever? Where do they go to learn more about this and find out about it?
Sure. So our website is www.guide2interchange.com. The name is a little double-barreled, and I kind of, with James, you and I talked about this.
Yes.
So if you're in the business, you think about interchange, obviously, but it's a guide to the interchange between two people. So it has two meanings. Mm-hmm. So we teach a lot about interchange with optimization and level 2, 3 data, but it's also the guide to that interchange. You can look me up on LinkedIn, Roger McNamara on LinkedIn. My email address is guide2interchange@gmail.com. And, my phone number, I'll throw it in here, is 561-379-3151. Again, 561-379-3151. James, one last thing I would add.
Yeah, sure.
You make a really good point about one account paying for this. What we've seen through COVID is a lot of ISOs, books of business, have been decimated. Mm-hmm. What we've seen in the B2B space is that there's much less of an effect on that business.
Oh, 100%.
That business has maintained throughout and in fact is growing.
Yep.
So if there was an ISO that's feeling a little bit isolated now, a little bit under pressure with their book of business, now is the time to kind of take that and run with it into the B2B space, because this portion of the business is literally limitless, and it gets you away from the pack and into a new space where there's a lot of open water for you to be able to make hay.
Well, Roger, I spent a lot of my career in the ACH check wire world, and I've always looked at credit card as sort of like, that's a consumer thing. That's not a B2B thing. And when you and I talked, it just like a light bulb went off in my head. I never understood, the true cost as you explain it. And I think that, when some of our listeners start thinking about that, the opportunities are limitless. I've always been like I said, I often joke I'm a check maven, but the one thing that is coming up, particularly with COVID, is things like check and ACH are not necessarily preferred anymore. Right. I talk to people, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, who talk about the mail delays and getting their checks and how it's like eating them up. I think there's almost an opportunity with COVID to sort of say, hey, here's another way to improve your balance sheet.
You got it. Yeah. And the issuers are not doing any less work in this space. The issuers are out there with VPay and P-card and all sorts of stuff, driving the demand for this. So
yeah. There's a lot of people that realize what a big opportunity it is. And so hopefully our listeners are going to jump on board, and let's let the ISOs take advantage of an opportunity for once, shall we?
Yeah.
So, hey,
Yeah.
Roger, such a pleasure having you on today. I really appreciate you sharing all the insights that you have with us, and I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point in the future, but we wish you great success out there, and thank you for taking the time. Hey, everybody. Today in our quick 2-minute promo here for Valor Paytech, the official sponsor of our podcast, Patty and I just want to really talk about omni-channel. You know, Patty, this word gets thrown around a lot, doesn't it?
A lot. It really does. And it seems to have different meanings depending on who's talking about it
Yeah.
or where they're talking about it.
Yes.
But I think this is really, it's very, very important today, especially to have an omni-channel presence and to be able to serve your customers no matter where they want to do business.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think for those listeners who are like, what is omni-channel? Well, omni-channel simply means you're able to take payments in store, you're able to take payments online, you're able to take payments via like emailing an invoice that has a link on it, all of these things.
Or a curbside.
Yes, everything.
Right.
And so,
everything.
I really believe that there have been some really good omni-channel solutions for larger merchants, POS solutions and things like that. But I think for small to medium merchants, they really haven't had a great solution that was processor agnostic anyway. That's where Valor Paytech really fits in. They provide an amazing dashboard, the ability, it's like a gateway. You can send email invoices out. They have, of course, their terminal in place, all of that built with cash discounting and surcharging in mind. And so I really think it's a great omni-channel solution for those small to medium merchants that are looking for that standalone terminal, but they want more than that, right, Patty? They want a little bit more.
And it also has some really cool bells and whistles, like customer satisfaction, email. I mean, the idea that you can capture the email and market to people,
digital receipts and all
through
that.
the various.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to learn more about Valor, definitely head over to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR. Schedule your free demo today and check it out. I promise you're not going to be disappointed.
And now, here is Questions from the Field with James Shepard.
So today, in Questions from the Field, Patty, I'm actually going to answer a real question that I just got yesterday, which I thought was a really good one. This question came from Zach. And Zach asked me and said, James, if you were starting an ISO today, what would you focus on? Because, there's so many things, right? There's cash discounting, there's B2B, there's all these things. And so my response to him was that there are 3 things I would choose from to focus on, and these 3 focuses would largely be determined by the sales force that I either had or that I was going to recruit, okay? So here's the way I broke it down for him. If I was going to be recruiting green agents from other industries, agents that maybe don't have a ton of experience in payments at all and in sales in general, I would, without a doubt, do cash discounting, and I would target, physical locations, small, medium-sized businesses in a local area with more of a scatter, strategy. I wouldn't have a really specific vertical. I would just say, go walk into all the businesses on this street and talk about eliminating the cost of payments. And I recently made like a 3.5-4 hour video training course called How to Sell Cash Discounting that I made that specifically for that purpose because I know that's what a lot of people are doing. And so if you're trying to get green agents into the industry and you're not focusing on cash discounting, that could be a mistake. I mean, it is just so easy.
I agree.
It's so profitable. It's just, there's a lot of advantages there.
And the training is so much easier, right? I mean,
yes, of course.
It's a lot easier to train them on cash discounting than
right.
Selling on basis points.
Exactly. It's like in a way you almost don't need to understand payments as much as you need to be able to explain that you're going to eliminate the cost of payments.
Right.
And so it's a lot easier to explain. Now, again, the more knowledge you have, the better it gets, no matter what. But it's easier to get somebody off the ground. I could get somebody literally, go through a 3.5-4 hour video course in the morning, take an hour break, come back and do Q&A and role play in the afternoon, and the next day they could be cold calling. I mean, literally you can get them out the door that fast. So that's a big advantage with green agents. Now, if you have agents that are a little bit more experienced in payments, right, and your company has more of a focus on technology, then I think another really valid path would be to pick a specific vertical and then really go all in on the technology integration and payment integration with that technology in that vertical. So it's like we're going to go after hair salons or pizza shops or whatever it is, and partner with a POS solution provider, understand how to integrate the online and the offline. So as people have seen lately, I've become a pretty big advocate for Zuza. So you could go to getzuza.com. That's one that has the online ordering and all of that kind of stuff. So think about, again, if it's a hair salon, you would need online scheduling of an appointment, right?
Sure.
And an in-store point of sale. So I would really go all in on that strategy and go after one specific vertical. And again, even for the individual agent, this applies to you. If you're a green agent, you're brand new coming into the industry, and you're like, what should I sell? You should sell cash discounting. If you've been in for a while and you're starting to try to figure out, okay, I really want to build something long term, I want to really get to the next level, maybe start thinking about looking at one vertical and becoming an expert in the technology for that vertical to be online and in store with a seamless integration there. And then the third one, which goes great with our episode today, is I told him this a couple days ago. I said, you really should think about if you're a true payments professional. I mean, you know how to read a statement. You understand interchange. You're a payments professional. Go B2B. No doubt about it. And people don't understand this from a financial perspective. It's actually a much larger opportunity than cash discounting.
The payoff is huge.
It is. Well, for two reasons.
Payoff.
Yeah, for two reasons, right? One is the residual itself is actually larger on average, significantly larger, if you present it correctly, like Roger was talking about, where you get a supplier that's doing, most of these suppliers are doing $1 million, $2 million a month in volume. A lot of them are, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of them are. There's a lot of them out there. And if you can actually get them, instead of running 30, 40,000, and it's like a lot of people, it's like Roger was saying, they're only getting the credit card volume that the supplier is grudgingly like, there's no other way to get this payment. I guess I'll take a card. You want to get it to where they feel like, wow, taking plastic is a good idea for our company. And now you're getting 300, 400, 500,000 a month, $1 million a month in volume. You're going to, especially with interchange optimization and other things to add some margin in there. I mean, you can make $1,000 a month on these accounts in residual. I mean, you really can. I've seen several lately through our statement analysis side. I've seen several where the rep was going to make over $2,000 a month in residual on one B2B account.
Wow.
So it's a huge opportunity. But then the other thing is you also have to look at the attrition. So cash discounting, because it's mainly, and again, I know I'm going to make everybody upset here, but I'm sorry, but the data is just there. There are facts. Truth is the truth. Cash discounting is still disproportionately with smaller merchant accounts, okay? So the smaller the merchant account, the more likely they are to do cash discounting. Now, I know there's a lot of huge accounts doing cash discounting, and I'm not saying there's not. I'm just saying statistically, it's more likely with the scenario I talked about earlier with the green agents. They're going to be going after the smaller accounts and selling cash discounting. Well, those businesses that are doing cash discounting are massively, more likely to go out of business and to stop processing than a $1 million a month, $2 million a month B2B supplier. They're the machinations of the economy almost mean nothing to them. I mean, it just doesn't impact their business the same way it does a consumer type business. There's a trickle down effect, but from an attrition perspective, you just can't really do better than B2B. Those accounts are going to stick with you forever as long as you take care of them and give them what they need.
Yeah, excellent. Great stuff, James. Thanks.
Thanks, Patty. So there you go. Go after one of those three, whether you're an individual agent or an ISO. And for an ISO, they can even do multiple. You can bring people in to sell cash discounting, right?
And bring people in to sell B2B.
B2B. And then in the middle, have some marketing campaigns they can participate in of, hey, this month we're all going after pizza shops. We have a special training about it. We have a new POS partnership. Then you can go sell it. We're gonna use our telemarketers to generate leads for you. Like, you can do that approach, and you can have the B2B with somebody like a Roger McNamara. So I think for the ISOs, they need to look at all three of these and figure out how they fit in. And then the individual agents, they just need to pick one and go after it. So there you go.
Excellent, James. Thank you.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
So, this week, James, I want to share some interesting data crunched by NMI. It comes from a survey of 300 merchants across the nation and across verticals.
Okay.
There were about a third of them were brick and mortar only, about 2/3 were brick and mortar and online.
Okay.
And here's some stuff that I just think this, it's sort of encouraging for our audience. We've had some rough economic news lately. So,
Right.
I thought I'd bring up some of this. Some basics. The most common payment methods used for in-store payments, swipe and EMV, are about 40% each.
Mm-hmm.
And I was interested because we've talked about contactless and everything. Tap to pay, which is the NFC stuff, and mobile payments were only about 6% each. But here's the interesting thing. Most merchants, 31%, would prefer customers pay using EMV cards.
Huh.
Followed by swipe, obviously, and then tap to pay.
Sure.
I thought that was interesting. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is the payment technology investments that merchants have made since March.
Right.
And not surprisingly, contactless is far and away the most common, with 57% of merchants investing in contactless technology. Pay an app, which I thought this is another interesting one. Pay an app, like the Starbucks, and
Right.
Was 35%.
Wow.
That was very surprising to me that 35 of them had invested in that.
Yeah.
And then about 3 in 10 had purchased new POS systems.
Okay.
And here's another interesting one. About a quarter of them had invested in digital receipts. And think about that, right? Because I know for me, I think it's great when the merchant says to me, "Do you want me to hand you the receipt, or you want an email?
Right.
Email, please."
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And that seems to be, to me, that's an opportunity.
Well, of course, then the merchant grabs the email address in addition to not having to pay for the cost of paper.
Right.
So it's a
right.
win-win.
It's a win-win. And here was another one interesting data point. Just shy of a quarter, 23% of merchants surveyed said they had lost sales because they didn't offer customers the contactless option.
Wow. What was that percentage again?
23%.
Wow.
That's
that's huge.
So if you have merchants out there that aren't doing contactless, I would take that to them, and say,
for sure.
You're losing sales, whether you know it or not. You're right. I mean,
yep.
And but I thought it was also interesting about the same number said that they don't see enough customer demand for contactless, which it was about 20%. So it's.
I really believe a lot of that is driven by geography.
That was the point I was just going to make, James.
Yeah. Because I know, like in my now I really do like the EMV, but I mean in my market, there's a lot of small businesses that are not accepting contactless yet, and I mean I do think that they lose some business, but I think their perception is that they're not losing business.
Right.
Because, a lot of people are not going to say anything about it in my area. I'm in a very rural, area in Pennsylvania.
Same here. Right.
Yeah. Whereas I think if you're a merchant in LA or in New York, I think consumers are going to be much more likely to say, "What do you mean you don't have contactless? What's wrong with you?" You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I had a conversation like this with a friend who lives in DC. And she said to me, if they don't take contactless, I'm not going.
Right.
It's the only thing I'm doing right now is contactless.
Right.
And again, she has a lot more choice than you and I do. Right.
Exactly.
So,
right.
I think that's part of it as well. But I do think that those things tend to trickle down, shall we say?
Right.
To the more rural markets. So I had one. This was an interesting data point that I really thought would, I wanted to end this on an optimistic note.
Sure.
Okay. They asked merchants what their anticipation was for 2021, and nearly 2/3, 62%, said they expect revenues next year to exceed 2020 totals.
Sure. Well, and I have to wonder too. I would imagine that this data you're referring to, I would imagine probably even came before the
election.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying before the last two announcements about the vaccines.
Right.
The one at 90% efficacy and the one at 95% that just came out, which again, regardless of your opinion about vaccines and whether or not you want to take it, I mean, the obvious thing is here that is going to have a dramatic impact on the opening back up of the economy.
Dramatic. I mean, just as an aside, I was supposed to take a trip this week with a friend who, to go out west.
Right.
We were going to go to California. They put a 14-day quarantine thing in, and we were like, nah,
I'm not going to go now.
Wait. And my friend even said to me, "That's okay, Patty. We'll wait for the vaccine."
Right, right, exactly.
And that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for people.
Yeah.
And then I also thought that and like you said, it was before the election, it was before the vaccine announcements, so I think that total is going to go up. And to pair with that, 21% said they think it's going to be about the same as 2020. And again, I think that number's, going to go down, and those more are going to shift to the other.
Yeah. I think it's definitely becoming, it's definitely becoming clear that by the second quarter, this vaccine and stuff like that, it takes a while. I mean, but I think by the second quarter of 2021, I mean, regardless of your, political opinions or your beliefs about vaccines or whatever, I mean, by second quarter 2021, the rationale for keeping the economy closed is going to be pretty thin, I think, at that point. And so hopefully, everything will be opened up and it'll be back to somewhat, business as usual.
Yeah, I agree, James. I think that, it's going to, when all is said and done, it's going to be a year of living tough. March to March. But I think that after March, things are gonna start lifting, and so
good stuff.
That's my report. Thanks, James.
I love it. This episode of the Merchant Sales Podcast was brought to you by Valor Paytech, the technology company that is revolutionizing cash discounting and surcharging with innovative features like dual mid support, waive the fee options, and even adding non-cash adjustment charges to tips. Now, all of this is made possible by a variety of technology devices and solutions such as gateways, tabletop point of sale devices, and features like SMS text messaging and e-invoicing, all with cash discounting in mind. Valor Paytech, bold ideas, smart execution. Make sure you head over to ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR, ccsalespro.com/Valor, VALOR. Schedule your free demo today and watch videos and learn more about this amazing technology solution.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.